we had colonial education, and then the missionary propaganda that everything Western is superior, everything is superior, and so we adopted it and we rejected our own calendar. Specialization is a way of domination. What happens is that the specialist doesn't have the entire picture, and the problem is that for the West, education is a means to power, technology development, or control of people. It's completely impossible to do anything in India with the NCERT and so on. They're not even willing to discuss it. But the term discovery is a very heavily loaded term. And it is loaded because of the church dogma attached to it. Vasco da Gama discovered India. What does that mean? I am against this idea of Vedic mathematics. I have written on it in Hindu, in Jansatta, and so on. First of all, because the label Vedic is misleading. That is Indian mathematics that we are replacing, because this mathematics that we do, simple arithmetic and so on, this is mathematics which went from India to Europe and came back through colonial education. This is our own mathematics.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first episode of O's Verse series. Our guest today is Professor C.K.Raju, a mathematician, a physicist, a computer scientist, a writer, a musician, and a teacher. A very warm welcome to you, Professor Raju.
Hello.
Hello. So I want to start by saying that when I wrote to you writing about the interview and wishing you Happy New Year, your immediate response was Happy New Year according to the Gregorian calendar. So let us begin with the calendar.
Sure.
So this is the beginning of the year, and that is according to the Gregorian calendar.
Right.
So how would you like to demystify this?
Well, I think that's a very long story, and it's not something which we can probably cover in a very short while. So, basic issue, let's try and understand the basic issue. Basic issue is that if you look at the duration of the year, of the tropical year, it is not an integral number of days. It's 365 and a fraction.
Yeah.
And if we look at the lunar and solar cycles, they are not commensurate. So one is not an integer times the other. And that creates a problem. And so the point is you want to reconcile that. And you're not able to reconcile that if you don't have good mathematics. And the Greeks didn't have good mathematics. The Romans didn't have good mathematics. They didn't have fractions. See, you're talking a fraction of a day, but they didn't know how to say a fraction of a day. And so what they did, that also they couldn't do. That's what the Egyptians told them. Till then they had a very bad calendar. And now that's very strong non-textual evidence for inferior mathematics. There's so many fantasies about Greek prowess in mathematics, but the reality is this non-textual evidence of the calendar. They couldn't manage fractions. And, after the Romans were better than the Greeks. They were more systematic. And, there was the Julian calendar, which started off after the conquest of Egypt by Julius Caesar. And Egyptians had a good calendar, and they had some understanding of all this, a very good understanding. They explained. And the point is that they suggested you use a leap year system. But even that leap year system, the Romans didn't quite understand. They thought every third year is a leap year for 20 years, and that's how Augustus Caesar got in and so on. But the point is that this calendar got appropriated as the official Christian calendar after the Nicene Council. It was adopted as that in order to determine the date of the principal Christian festival of that time, namely Easter. And it was adopted there. And then what you see is the Easter festival, they could not get it right, because to get the Easter festival depends on the full moon. And so they had to keep track of the lunar cycle. It was just not possible on the Greek calendar. It's still not possible on the Julian calendar. So they had a big problem with that. And because there was this dependence on the moon, I mean, this tells stories about Ptolemy, that Ptolemy was a great Greek astronomer. Now, if Ptolemy did exist and if he was such a great astronomer, why couldn't they correct the calendar? Because the defect in the Julian calendar, because they assumed that the year is 365 and a quarter day. That's a wrong figure. It's a wrong figure even by the standards of those days. So it's not exactly 365 and a quarter, but they had only those primitive fractions. So there was a problem, and this issue was transparent, but they couldn't do anything. And how come, if there were such great astronomers like Ptolemy, that's a myth. There was a king called Ptolemy, but an astronomer is a myth. It's a 12th century text, which is somehow attributed. So they could not correct it for 1,000 years. And then the Gregorian reform came, and that became imperative, because the correct date of the equinox was needed for the determination of latitude. And that was a very important economic aspect. They said it's all about Easter, but Easter, the problem was apparent for 1,000 years. And so they corrected it. But the point is, when they corrected it, they still used leap years. They had by then gotten fractions and so on, but they used leap years. Now, using leap years, the problem is that it is not a good system, because they said, okay, they wanted to say that the duration of the tropical year is 365.241. So they said every fourth year is a leap year, but every 100th year is not a leap year. So subtracting 0.01. And every 1,000th year is a leap year, like, 2000 year was a leap year. So they got the figure. It's not an exact figure, but they got some kind of a figure. But the problem is, this gets the tropical year right only on an average. And therefore, what happens is that equinox doesn't come on the same day. Now, if you look at the Indian calendar, just now we had Makar Sankranti. Now, it won't come on the same day of the Gregorian calendar. It keeps varying slightly, because although it's a solar thing, it's about the equinox. So this is the kind of thing that happens. And but anyway, you see, we had colonial education, and then the missionary propaganda that everything Western is superior, everything is superior, and so we adopted it and we rejected our own calendar. I tried to explain this for 20 years, but people just don't see. Some people have started understanding. I have this longish video on that, Tale of Two Calendars. So maybe you can take a look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask you, you are a physicist, a computer scientist, a writer, a musician, and also a teacher. So, what would you, do you identify more with any one of these, or one of these, or, you are all of these? How do you?
Oh, well, see, that is a slightly complicated question, because, first of all, I don't like to be straitjacketed. That is for sure. And the second thing is that I don't want, you see, there is a problem with specialization in this society. Specialization is a way of domination. What happens is that the specialist doesn't have the entire picture. You think of Charlie Chaplin in modern times. He specialized to turning one screw, which he keeps turning. Right? Now, that's not a very good idea, because it is, as they say, alienating. That is true. And it sort of cuts you off from an understanding of the whole. But it's a good way of domination. See, what a typical software manager does today is that he parcels out a small portion to various people. So nobody has the big picture, and therefore you cannot change the big picture. You start trying to do something in physics, you run into a problem with mathematics, you run into, so then you've got something, you try to explain it. So there are all kinds of things that are involved, which you need to know if you want to bring about a change. This specialization helps to prevent any single person from getting the larger picture and bringing about a change.
This is very interesting. My question, why I asked, was also because, as you understand, we have also discussed when I first wrote to you that, that there's this whole gap. And in my interactions also with other people, when you're doing one thing, you cannot be associated with the other thing, especially science and art subjects. The divide, I suppose, is very huge. So, I didn't know you when I first wrote to you. We hadn't met, but I was very much aware of your area of work. I wasn't even sure whether you would respond to my email. But your reply to my email, I very clearly remember. You quoted from literature, Shakespeare, and you even encouraged me when I just explained what I was embarking on in just about one sentence. Also because I wasn't quite sure if I should myself proceed with it. So, that tendency to segregate disciplines along with ranking them in order of importance, particularly now, post-modern era, according to literary age, that again only addresses the Western literary ideas. However, how do you view this? Is there a remedial way of going forward?
Well, I don't know. I would say that the importance attached to a discipline ultimately depends upon how well it serves the interests of the powerful people in society. So, let's start with, say, liberal arts. Why were liberal arts valued in Europe? Because they were the weapon of the priest. The priest wants to give a sermon. He needs all the flourishes, the storytelling skills, the rhetoric, and the imagery that goes with literature. Yeah. So it became something very important. But then in the 19th and 20th century, there was a rise of science, and science became a source of hard power, especially after the Manhattan Project and so on. So the big money went into science, and it is still there because science is seen as a way for military and economic progress. Right. But then after the Cold War, see, remember, everybody has got nuclear weapons, but you can't use it because if you use it, the whole world blows up and everyone suffers. So this is a problem. Yes. So then there was, if you recollect, a talk of a unipolar world. And now this unipolar world idea, they suddenly realized that they did not have as much power as they had during colonialism. Because during colonialism, the West was respected. Now it is seen as an oppressor. Increasingly, recognition that, there was genocide, there were all sorts of things. So the idea was that in the 19th century, 20th century, they thought science was important, but we've come back to the idea that the arts are again important, that, propaganda is important, and that requires all sorts of skills, sermonizing. So I think that the pendulum has shifted a bit. Yeah. So it is, both are equally important as of now. People are realizing that.
Yes, and while you say both are equally important, I'd also like to draw attention to the present-day curriculum in India in schools, and I'm sure you're aware of this. It's the same. There is this label, extracurricular activities, where art subjects mostly fall, as well as sports. And again, this also influences the parents' attitudes who push their children to pursue science subjects, irrespective of what their children would like to pursue. So when you say that the pendulum has shifted, before how long do you think the shift is going to be effective?
You see, there is a difference in the perceptions in the West and the East. And one of the things that happens is that the West is interested in power. So whether it is hard power or whether it is soft power, whether you are studying psychology and using that to manipulate people, or you're studying sociology, using that to manipulate people, and so on. And so I think that there is a problem so far as India is concerned, or for that matter, so far as all the colonized countries are concerned. And the problem is that for the West, education is a means to power, technology development, or control of people. But here, when education first came as liberal arts education, it had no connection whatsoever to the lives of people. And so how could they explain why you should spend these 15 years or 10 years in school, achieving what, to what end? And so the only end that was given was, okay, you learn all this, it's completely meaningless, but you'll get a job. That became a problem, so that is how people see education in India today, or in most of the colonized countries, not just in India. That's true in Malaysia, that's true in South Africa, that's true in South America. They see education as a means to get a job.
I think the Germans also had what was called the Brotstudium, to study for the bread,
Yeah. So it is. It has become like that. And therefore, the issue is, what will you get with arts? What kind of job will you get? So maybe you won't get a very good job. I mean, maybe if you're very good at drawing or something like that, but that requires skill. Whereas if you are doing some programming, for example, even if you're a mediocre programmer, you will get a good living. And so I think that what has happened is that in India, we are following what we learned from colonial education is that the West is superior, imitate them. So we are waiting for them to do something before we make a change. And actually what we should do is we should re-examine the whole education system and ask ourselves, what do we want from it? And we should want knowledge from it. Not merely a job at the end of the day. I mean, a job is something that comes along with it. You need a means of livelihood. Nobody denies that. But that should not be the sole goal.
Yeah.
That, I think, is a major problem caused by colonial education. It has devalued entire education for the colonized.
Also, considering you've worked with different councils and have advised different boards, have you found that laborious in terms of bringing a change, or do you think that we will see the change soon enough?
Well, I found it impossible. No, it's completely impossible to do anything in India with the NCERT and so on. They're not even willing to discuss it. They have only one straight rule: imitate, 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 and we cannot depart from imitation. It's heresy to depart from imitation. So they are absolutely unwilling, and this is true from bottom to top. It's not true for people, but they don't seem to realize how much of an effort is required to make a change for the sake of future generations.
Yes.
And nobody seems to understand what a big issue this is, that education has been mucked up like this by colonization.
Yes, and we have students traveling abroad to study further, and there is that brain drain.
Because it's a better job.
Yeah.
Because that's how it is ranked. If you are related to the West, then you are better off and you get a better job.
Yes.
So that's the equation.
Yes. I must also talk about your book, 11 Pictures of Time. It's fascinating. Thank you for taking the effort to write a book for all and not just for the specialists. and especially by not jargonizing your text. You present the argument how time is cyclical and not linear, unlike what we've been made to learn, believe, or understand. For those who haven't had a chance to read your book, how would you debunk this theory succinctly that time is linear?
Yeah. I think first thing is that it is important to understand that you can't have this simple dichotomy between linear and cyclic time. In fact, the title of the book is 11 Pictures of Time, just because the idea is you don't put 1 and 1 together to make 2, you make 11, but that's just fun. The important thing is, it's very important to understand that cyclical time is not quite cyclical. It's quasi-cyclic time and not cyclic time. It's a very clear distinction between the two. And unfortunately, what should I say? The church confounded two types of time, deliberately confounded them, in order to make out that, if you have super cyclic time, same event repeats again and again and again and again, and there is no escape. So it demonized super cyclic time, but it was confounding the two, confounding two different types of cyclic time, and therefore there isn't one single type of cyclic time that one can talk about, and that confusion is very dangerous. Okay, so we should talk about quasi-cyclic time, quasi-cyclic time, and super cyclic time. My dictaphone doesn't accept quasi-cyclic times. It wants quasi-cyclic time. So this has created long-term confusion about cyclic time in Western thought. And I think the stock example of that is Nietzsche. Nietzsche founded his entire philosophy on this concept of cyclic time, and he used super cyclic time because he went to physics. And he used physics as the justification, and he thought this is against the church because the church needs linear time. And so he founded his whole philosophy on that. Now, the same problem applies also to linear time. What do we mean by linear time? So there is a notion of time in physics, which I call superlinear time, exactly like the real line, like you have the real line. So it's a line, straight line. But there is also mundane time, where you say, okay, past can't be changed, but the future can be transformed. So it's future branching and past linear.
Yeah.
But you confound the two. So people say, with cyclic time, everything is predetermined, but with linear time, with superlinear time, everything is equally predetermined. So you confound mundane time with superlinear time. And this is a very common confusion in Western philosophy, including with Karl Popper. Yeah, and I wrote to him, he was a long time back, 1991 or something like that. And he said he would respond, but he never responded. But there is no response, it's so we have to discriminate between superlinear time and mundane linear time. And this involves, mathematically speaking, something called real numbers, and most people don't know what real numbers are and so forth. But the point is, it was a great victory for the church that this view that it had of, if you have cyclic time in the sense of quasi-cyclic time, you have repeated lives after death. Yeah. And the church wanted a resurrection, not reincarnation, because it said there is only one life. Otherwise, you take any amount of time, you take 100,000 births to reform, then where's the power of the church? And where's the need for the priest?
Yeah.
So it was a great victory for them. And this came about because Newton was a very devout Christian. He was terribly against the church, but he was a devout Christian all the same. So you have to, discriminate between these two things, between the church and between Christianity.
Yes.
So he was, because church is a political entity, Christianity is a religion. So he was a devout Christian, was terribly against, abusively against the church for most of his life. He wrote all that stuff. But it was a great victory for the church that he got confused and got this notion of linear time into physics. Because his predecessor, Isaac Barrow, he said clearly there can be two types of time. Time could be linear, could be cyclic. He was still confused on that. But Newton said it must be linear. Why? There is no reason in his physics for it to be linear. Now it has become necessary because to do Newtonian physics, you must use calculus. To do calculus, you must use real numbers. And real numbers means time must be modeled on real numbers, and therefore time must be superlinear. So it's a very big problem. It's a very deep problem. Hardly anybody understands what is happening. And in a manner of speaking, I've been trying to explain this for so long. Most people don't understand. And that's why I wrote these books, because I gave up. It was a matter of desperation for me trying to explain to people and not succeeding.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So if you, after bringing out the book, what have you experienced in terms of the acceptance? Have readers responded favorably, or do you still face criticism, or was there any demonizing of your work?
There hasn't been much criticism of the book, but the point is people are still not understood. And so it seems I have to write one more book. It's clear. So this is a problem, and I think it is an important thing that it should be clarified. So there hasn't been, so far as this book is concerned, there hasn't been that kind of demonization, which I did with mathematics, what I'm trying to do. That is, it really affects people. They feel very unhappy. But that doesn't happen with this. They have sort of appreciated it, but not attacked it too much. Perhaps they haven't understood.
So do you think it's better when you are writing books and papers than when you orally propagate? All the same.
No. You see, I used to, when I was in Pune University, I had these ideas about time. And they had a very nice canteen there, those days. Okay. Now it is a bit spoiled. And it was very few people those days on the Pune University campus. So you could sit under the tree and you could talk and discuss. And I tried to explain for so many years about my ideas of time. And I found nothing was getting across. The same questions were coming back again and again and again. And I said, there must be a problem. I said, maybe there's a problem with what I'm saying. So let me write it down. And so I wrote it down, and that's how the first book came into existence. And then I realized that even that is not, there's so many things that have been left out. And so I wrote the second book, the 11 Pictures of Time book. And now I see that a third book is needed to make it absolutely crystal clear what I'm talking about and how it relates to religious belief, and how a religious belief has intruded into science, and how you need to, look at it much more carefully.
Yes, and thank you so much for not giving up despite all that you've been through all these years. And you mentioned the church as well. Now, the Roman Catholic Church have a lot of answering to do if matters were in your hands, say if they had to undergo a trial. You have explained the problem, but do you think the scientific community could get together, given the divide in the Eastern and Western approach?
Well, I think first thing is about the church. You need a little clarification. I'm not just talking about the Roman Catholic Church.
Okay.
Because all the churches are involved. This is just a Wikipedia misrepresentation of what I'm saying.
Okay.
Right? And I have no way to correct it. No, I can't correct what Wikipedia writes about me because I'm the primary source. They won't accept the primary source.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's the problem. So all the churches, well, most of the churches, they accept the Nicene Council. And certainly Protestant churches do. So it's not about Roman Catholic versus Protestant. They all accept Augustine. And they accept the church curse on cyclic time and so on. They accept the belief in a linear notion of eternity and resurrection. They accept the notion of eternal hell and heaven. So it's not really about being Roman Catholic or Protestant. It's a very minor difference so far as the Pope is concerned, right? So I think that basically people need to understand that these are not about religious beliefs. The church is a political entity, and although it claims to represent the religion, it has all sorts of obnoxious political beliefs which have led to a great deal of evil in the world, like the genocide of the Americans or Australians. That's based on church dogmas. And that is extremely vicious, and people don't understand because their notion of morality, their notion of goodness comes from the church. They have not seen this past history of it, which is very terrible. I mean, at least 100 times worse than what Hitler did. That's what you can say about the genocide. So I think that it's a very big issue because the church controls our education system. It indoctrinates us. It doesn't just indoctrinate people who actually attend church. It indoctrinates everybody who's part of the education system. They talk of Euclid, they talk of this, that, all sorts of church myths get into the system. So that becomes a very major problem, overcoming that indoctrination. And I don't see that scientists are going to unite in any way because their views are also deeply influenced and they are willing to take this forward. They realize that look at what happened to Penrose, who got the Nobel Prize in physics last year. And it is exactly the church idea. After all, Stephen Hawking, if you've seen 11 Pictures of Time, is about creationism. And Penrose is doing that. And look at George Ellis. When I went to South Africa, he came after me with scurrilous attacks in the South African press. So they hope that scientists will do anything against that. No way.
No.
Science is about power. It's about money, wherever it comes from. They have to get it, right? So I don't think science is about truth. Let's not have that naive idea of a quarrel between science and religion from the time of Galileo or something like that. Yeah. So it's a very complex problem.
It is complex, I suppose, in terms of the in mathematics also the talk about it being discovery and not invention. From what I have understood from reading your work and this discussion, also it seems that there are inventions as well.
Yes, of course, there are inventions in mathematics. There is no question about that. But the term discovery is a very heavily loaded term. And it is loaded because of the church dogma attached to it. Vasco da Gama discovered India. What does that mean? So, I mean, I used to ask my teacher, where were we before we were discovered? And it was an innocent question. It was not sarcasm.
I know.
But he said, we are right here. So I was deeply puzzled. So what does this discovery mean? And discovery doctrine, as you know, is a very vicious doctrine because all the land in the US was seized on the principle of that discovery doctrine, that the first Christian to come across something becomes its discoverer. Like Newton discovered the calculus. Calculus existed, it was invented. So there can be invention and also discovery attached to the same thing. And this is problematic because people assume that there is always the normal meaning attached to discovery versus invention. But there is this problem that there is a theological jargon associated with that term, which is very often used. For example, if you say Copernicus discovered heliocentrism.
Yeah.
He discovered it in the Christian theological sense of taking it from Ibn Shatir. Ibn Shatir was a Muslim, but he was, a Christian priest, Copernicus, and so therefore the discovery, credit for the discovery goes to him.
Yeah.
It's very bad what happens here.
Yeah, that was going to be one of the next questions following. So now that you've mentioned it, the whole understanding of heliocentrism, I also want to bring one more point, academic imperialism, which is huge, and relating that to heliocentrism. That aside, we also have to address this because in India, too, there is a tendency to want to say that knowledge is concentrated in one particular region, and the Surya Siddhanta does not talk about heliocentrism, but if you see, that is what a lot of people are arguing about, that it was already known to Indians and it was a part of Surya Siddhanta. So if you could please shed some light on that.
Yeah, I think that first of all, this is another one of those myths that we have. As I said, Copernicus plagiarized from Ibn Shatir and the Maraghet school.
Yeah.
And the work of Ibn Shatir was available in Greek translation in the Vatican, which he translated into Latin without understanding. So basically, he was a frightened priest, not a revolutionary. Second thing is, what is the revolution exactly in heliocentrism? Maybe could I share my screen and show you an animation?
Sure.
Yeah, so I will do that then. I think that if you're looking at what exactly is the value that you get from heliocentrism, because science is what? Science is about observation. I should be able to explain what I observe. Now, from the time of Copernicus until very recently, until we started having space flight, where did we observe the stars from? Where did we observe the planets? We observed them from Earth.
Yes.
So no matter what theory you have to transform it to a geocentric point of view to be able to compare with experiments. So what is the big deal about heliocentrism? Right? That's the first point.
Yes.
Okay, which has to be made clear because people go by the story. They don't think of the simple thing that science must compare with experiments and with observation, and observations are all geocentric. So whatever theory you have, heliocentric or geocentric, ultimately you have to transform it to a geocentric thing to compare with observations.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
That's central. Second point is, if you look at what was actually there in the Indian planetary models. Now, I will not talk of Surya Siddhant. Let's talk of the models at the time of Nilkant. So Nilkant's model was stolen and it went to Europe, where it was discovered by Tycho Brahe, discovered in the sense of Christian discovery, discovered because he was the astronomer royal to the Holy Roman Empire. So the Jesuits who took it from Kochi, they naturally went to Tycho Brahe, and Christoph Clavius was the Jesuit general. So the Tychonic model is where all the planets are going around the sun, but the sun with all the planets is going around the earth.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as I said, let me show you a picture of that. And there is really no difference between the two so far as any observation is concerned.
Okay.
So what is the big deal about heliocentrism? Big story that Thomas Kuhn told.
Okay.
And that's a bad story because it starts with Ptolemy, and Ptolemy doesn't really exist. Ptolemy as a Greek king existed, but Ptolemy as an astronomer did not. And what we have is some 12th century text, which is an accretive text, which has got all sorts of inputs, including inputs from India. So I think that talking about the Copernican revolution because of heliocentrism is a big story. Everybody has got the story, but nobody thinks of this simple thing. And after all, as a child, you would make diagrams, planets are all going around the sun. So it didn't make any difference if the sun with all the planets goes around the earth. So let me show you this point just to make it clear. So this is it's a simple, what you call Copernican model, a Keplerian model, where all the planets are going around the sun.
Yes.
Right? So you see them going around.
Yes.
All right, it's the simple stuff that everybody understands.
Yes.
All right. Okay, so let me take this off and let's take the shared windows closed. Okay, let me go to the next one, which is the Tychonic model. And so now you see this working. Now, really speaking, there is no difference between this and the previous one, except that you see the big circle against the background. If you didn't have the background, there would be no difference. To find out whether the sun is not stationary, whether the earth is stationary, the earth seems to be going around the sun.
Yes.
So you have to put your cursor on that and see whether it is moving. right?
Okay, yeah.
Whether it is moving or stationary or what. So it's stationary. Now if I put the cursor, I can make out, otherwise the illusion is that the earth is going around the sun.
Okay.
So they are indistinguishable. Right? So it is, heliocentrism is just a big story. It's a simpler way to solve the problem of Newtonian physics in that context. But Newtonian physics came later. At the time of Copernicus, what was the big deal with heliocentrism? So let me stop this.
Yes.
So it is not at all clear. So there will be a difference if you say that at the time of Copernicus, heliocentrism led to this improvement in results over the taconic model. Nobody has shown that.
Yes.
So at that time, right? Today, I mean, you do it in a certain way that's different. You have greater accuracy, you have greater speed, and so on. So it's a big story. But it's a story. We have to understand that our mind has been captured by so many stories. And they all very credible because everybody tells them, and you do it from childhood. You are indoctrinated. I still remember as a child, I used to make these planets, and my children also do it, and so on. So it becomes a sort of done thing. The sun is stationary. Now, how do you really know that the sun is stationary? Sun is not stationary, isn't it rotating along around the galaxy?
Okay.
So it's not, should not be a heliocentric theory, maybe a galactocentric theory.
Okay.
Or something like that. So it is just, something, I don't know, it's a story. It's a very big story and it has been spread everywhere, but I don't see the merits of that. Okay. At least not at the time of Copernicus. In fact, Al-Biruni says, well, these two theories are there, but I don't see the difference between them in terms of predictions. They're the same.
They're the same in terms of predictions, in terms of calculation and everything.
So, and that you have to come down to geocentrism because observations are geocentric.
Yes. This is
that's a problem. Yeah.
Yes. Could we please just mention what is in Surya Siddhanta, please? Just to put.
Surya Siddhanta is, you see, what you call the Ptolemaic model, and which has got things like, eccentric orbits and so on and so forth. And so it is what you call incremental model. And it is not so neat because you have these, circles within circles and so on. So the model gets complex. Okay. But this late thing that I gave you, which comes from the Aryabhat school, Neelkant belongs to that school. This is a very simple, neat system, but nobody has talked about it.
Okay.
Right? Nobody has talked about it because it was done in India, and we don't have any, proper historians here doing things or celebrating them or writing these stories. And not enough to write stories; they have to be propagated.
Yes.
They have to be sold. Stephen Hawking writes something, and then there are so many people selling it.
Yes.
So I think that is something, the means of propaganda we don't have. Even if you have storytellers, you don't have the means to sell their stories.
Yes.
It's not on the same scale.
Yes, I'm kind of flabbergasted with this because I don't think we've discussed this, and this is quite interesting. Now, to address the elephant in the room, the East and the West gap and all the talks surrounding academic imperialism or capitalism. How do you view this? Knowledge evolved throughout the world, but why is there the tendency to claim knowledge as if only having evolved in one particular region of the world, not that the East is not guilty of doing it? Because
I think that first of all, we need to understand what the term West means.
Okay.
That's also a clarification that is needed. Mostly when I speak of the West, I'm referring to West as in Western Europe. Right? And East as in Eastern Europe, which is not the same thing as the Occident versus the Orient. Okay, and why is that? Because it's the Western Church, the Western Europe, which went into colonization, slavery, Inquisition, Crusades, all of that came from Western Europe, not so much from Eastern Europe. And the Western Europe, that is why Western Europe is rich. But in the process, it has hurt so many hundreds of millions of people and taken killed them and stolen their land and so on. So there's been genocide, there's been slavery, crusades, Inquisition, and so on.
Of course.
Now, if you're looking at the issue of the Orient versus Occident, then the issue is not that what developed where. The issue is that the West has tried to grab all knowledge, just as it tried to grab all the land in the world. In what sense does America belong to Americans? In what sense does Australia belong to Americans? Because they killed everybody there who was originally there. It's a straightforward case of genocide. So the same way, just as they grabbed land, they grabbed knowledge. And based on the same principle of Christian discovery, the first Christian who cites a piece of knowledge becomes its owner. So the land grab is obvious. The knowledge grab is not obvious. Because we have been brought up to worship those people who grab knowledge, whether it is Copernicus, whether it is Newton. There's a Copernicus Road in Delhi. So people get offended because they are idolized and they are worshipped. So when you say something against Newton or Copernicus, people get offended. Oh, why are you insulting my God? But why is he your God? And somebody told you some nonsense about him, you should find out the truth. So there was a systematic attempt to grab, and this thing started during the Crusades, when all Arabic texts came into Europe. And the first universities in Europe were based on those Arabic texts. Now, during the Crusades, how could they study from Arabic texts, from the texts of the enemy? So they had to appropriate them. And simple way of appropriating was to falsify history and say this was all done by the Greeks, and therefore it is our inheritance. And somehow we forgot about it for, something. So some 1500 years, we suddenly forgot about it, and now we've rediscovered it. The Arabs kept it in safekeeping. Now, what kind of a silly myth is this? Why should anybody believe it? You should have evidence. Where is this evidence for Euclid, or where is the evidence for Archimedes, or where is the evidence for Aristotle? I mean, this is all coming from Arabic texts. And they were just grabbed. So that was the first thing. Then you have this inquisitional model like that of Copernicus, where because he was, I wouldn't blame Copernicus as a person. All right, he was a priest, he was a frightened priest. He was frightened of the Inquisition, but the Inquisition was frightening. There's no doubt about it. So he just said, it's my thinking. And when he writes in his preface, he gives he quotes the Pope, and he quotes some to cardinals and so on and so forth in his defense. Then there was the Christian discovery model, as you say, when Newton discovered the calculus and so on and so forth. So now this is a major problem, this attempt to appropriate knowledge and tell other people they are inferior. Because it was that sense of inferiority which led to slavery, the sense of inferiority which led to genocide, the sense of inferiority which led to colonialism, and the celebration of colonialism as some very great moral achievement. So naturally people are going to react to it, and you can't compare the two.
Yes.
This is the force of evil. This kind of appropriation is a force of evil. And it is furthermore a force of evil because when it was appropriated, this epistemology was also changed to suit the church epistemology. And that does great damage to mathematics, it does great damage in physics, and so on. And so that needs to be changed. But there is this state-church nexus. So we can't just spread blame equally. You have to first come to a level playing field, and then we can talk about it. But where is that level playing field? Right? Because there's centuries of false history. Church has been writing false history since the time of Orosius, history against the pagans, and since the time of the Crusades. And how do we correct it today? It's not easy. Simple thing like Euclid, I'm trying to correct. Nobody has evidence for Euclid. They refuse to take it out. They won't take it out from the texts. They won't take it out from anywhere. They won't rethink about it. So it's a very difficult process. And I think we need to correct it and not simply say that the East is also doing that. And there are foolish people doing various things. But why are they doing that? Because there is no funding. Right? There should be funding for the study of history and philosophy of science. And I have been asking people to do that, asking the government to do that for the last 20 years, more than 20 years. But nobody is interested in funding. And you say, why are they talking nonsense? Obviously, if you have a well-funded research and no funded research, then the well-funded people will do much better.
Surely. So, I mean, I don't know if this is the right thing to say, but I remember when I was in Brazil and I was taking a flight, and there was this airport called Santos Dumont Airport. And so the person, when I asked further, I was informed or educated that so in Brazil, they name Santos Dumont as the person to have, with the crediting with the bringing about of aeroplane, the first person, and not the Wright brothers. So they do not, they haven't changed that. But so for someone, for us, this is what we are learning in our textbooks. And so it's actually something that the Latin American world has not accepted. And also in terms of literature, again, anything from the Latin American world we have is again post-Christian era, because everything was destroyed before then, and we don't have anything from before the colonization and that destruction. So
before genocide.
Yes, genocide to be exact. Yes. So that is so there is a lot going on in that sense. Now, I also this is something that I wanted to ask. How much do you relate to Anton Chekhov's short story, The Bet? You might already know this, but for the viewers who might be interested in knowing, it is a story about a man who, in order to win a big prize money, agrees to voluntary confinement of 15 years. He then spends his time in confinement, at first feeling lonely, frustrated, and depressed. And then slowly reading and educating himself on a wide range of subjects. And the ending of the story is the deduction that true freedom or liberation is in knowledge, because the protagonist, in order to not receive the prize money, which would be curtailing his newly found freedom, escapes the confinement the night before the agreed day of freedom, from confinement to truly be liberated, which would be without the prize money. Now, why I ask you this is because you have said, and I quote, the Western history of science was designed by priests during the Crusades and Inquisition. Also, this worked like a leash to enslave people mentally.
And by racist historians. And by colonial historians.
Yes. This worked like a leash to enslave people's people mentally.
Yeah. Well, I think there are two different meanings of liberation that are involved here.
Okay.
So what Chekhov is talking about is something very general. Liberation from this desire to consume more and more. And I think I remember a story that was by Gorky perhaps, not by Chekhov. So where this chap goes to meet a millionaire and then says, okay, so you have $1 million. Now what do? Do you have 4 meals a day? So obviously you can't do that. So it's a different thing, that liberation lies in knowledge and not in consumption. All right, that is fine. But here we have a different kind of enslavement, which is the enslavement of one group of people by another. So if you see a slave who is chained, obviously he would like to escape. A bird is put in a cage, it would like to escape and lead its own life, right? So
Yeah.
you've been put in a cage, but in this case, the cage is just made of lies, which people have not understood. And that is a different kind of liberation, which is absolutely essential.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So Chekhov is a much higher level of things. This is a very low level of enslavement from which you do need to escape. And the way to escape is quite simple, namely just check all the false history you've been told, whether it's of Copernicus, whether it's of heliocentrism, whether it's about Newton and calculus, whether it's about anything else.
Yeah.
And if you check, it all falls to pieces.
Okay.
That's the shocking thing that I came across. And yes, whether it's about flight, I ran a course on history and philosophy of science in Malaysia. And my students came from a lot many places. There was, I'm not sure if they came from Brazil, but certainly from Africa, from Kazakhstan, so on, from Middle East, and so on. And I used to ask them to write about this, because I said correcting this history is not one man's job. I can only point you towards it, and I only know something little bit. So, whether it's the source of the Nile River, you always find a white man associated with the discovery. So he discovered, everybody else, they didn't matter. So it is terrible. So they thought about it. And one of the things is flight. So there are many things about flight among Arabs, among this and so on, very many people. And in India also, I think there was also a film about it, somebody trying out flight in Juhu Beach and so on. I don't know what the facts are, but there are all these stories around. And the point is that those facts need to be investigated and verified. And you can't just dismiss the whole thing, because there has been a very systematic effort to instill a false history in order that we should worship these false gods of science, whether it is your Copernicus or Newton and so on.
Yeah. Because in terms of research, even in medical science, everything, is
started with Harvey,
on its
Greeks, and then it jumped to Renaissance. That's a stock model, what I call the stock model. Everything started with the Greeks, that means Crusades came from the Arabs, and then it jumped to post-Renaissance Europe, that means Inquisitional model, and so on, and Christian discovery model, and things like that. And then during colonization, they appropriated, and they're still appropriating. My book was serially plagiarized by this Atiyah fellow, who was the president of the Royal Society and supposed to be this, great mathematician, only mathematician to have got Fields Medal and Nobel Prize, and did it very shamelessly, brazenly, and American Mathematical Society is still defending it. So appropriation is the term, and I think that has to be fought, that has to be resisted, and it has to be resisted with facts. I'm not saying that we should weave alternative fantasies, but we need the facts and we need to investigate, and that requires a major effort. It's going to take a long time to get things out. The world is going to look like a very different place.
Long time. That long time is what is tricky and problematic, I suppose. But there are so many topics one can discuss with you because of how diverse you are in terms of your interests. You have also mentioned in one of our conversations about racism and colorism, and that too you have said is an import. That it is not like what we see now in India, like someone insisting to marry the lighter skinned person, or when a child is born, one of the first questions would be, is the child dark or lighter skinned? That is something in our fabric, is what I thought. But then again, you have something to talk about.
It's not in our fabric. If you look at Krishna is dark.
Yes.
Right? Look at Kali is dark. So you look at, in fact, Arjun is also dark. So there are so many ancient heroes who are dark. And I agree that racism is an import from the West, and I think the crudest manifestation of it is the Aryan race conjecture, which tries to conflate race and caste. And yes, it has caught on in a big way. It has caught on in terms of sociology, for example. The sociology text even today will talk of caste and race in India. Ghurye is the sociology text, I think. Race and caste in India. And where is the race? He doesn't know. No, you just spin some stories about race, and some ancient time somebody came and some imaginary. It's all about fantasies, right? And it is even there in the politics. Look at the DMK, Dravid. The word Dravid is the counterpart of Aryan. And there also it is fair versus dark. That is a simple kind of thing that is done. So I think that these are all things which are problematic, and these are things which also have to be resolved. And I think an effort is going on, and I think this effort will be successful.
You think so?
It is going to succeed.
Yeah.
And what we are seeing in terms of, what is happening, I'm sure that in the long run, these theories are going to be overthrown, and change is going to come about.
Now, I don't know how many of our viewers know this, but I found out about this. Professor Raju, you play the flute. I found some tracks on your website, and I even shared it with some of my musician friends. How did this interest come about?
Well, it has nothing to do with Plato, let me say, about music and mathematics. Right? I learned about Plato much later. It's something very mundane. I spent the first few years of my life in a girls' college. It used to be called a girls' college at that time, and it's still called a girls' college, a girls' postgraduate college. So now at that point of time, the role of a woman was to get married and to please her husband. Right. And therefore, what women used to do was to learn singing and dancing. Yes. And my house, I was still inside in the campus. So my house was right next to the hall where they used to sing and dance. So the first several years of my life went in listening to that. And then, of course, I moved to a different city. And after that, my only music that I had was the Hindi film songs or pop Western music or whatever. But that urge remained. And quite late in life, I took up the flute. And because I wanted to learn classical Indian music and see what it is like. And then I really got engrossed by it and so on. Now, of course, I can't play. My fingers don't work. So it's not possible. I can't even play the keyboard. But my son did learn. He picked it up and he developed a great interest in music, which he's carrying on. So that was just something, what should I say? It's just something which fascinated me while it lasted. So,
yes, and I hope you find something else again, which will enhance.
I may be able to move my fingers in due course, maybe in another 6 months or 1 year. Yeah.
You're extremely curious. You get interested in so many things, and I'm sure you will find something else also interesting in music. And this was very fascinating for me to know this side of yours. And it is so wonderful. And also, again, reiterating that the whole art and science worlds aren't that far apart. They exist in you, those two sides as one. So one should take your lead. At O, early learning is an area of focus, and the significance of fluency in language and mathematics before learning anything else is what most advanced studies point to. The language of mathematics, more than beginning with the numbers and digits, is what studies are suggesting. Now, India being multilingual and the most preferred medium of education in India now is English. Do you think children coming into school equipped with, let us say, fluency in their mother tongue, be it any language, not English, begins with an unavoidable gap in learning, especially mathematics?
Yeah, I think so, but I think the real problem is not about language. It's about concepts. And if you are talking about simple things, which have ostensive empirical reference, I'm talking about a dog or a snake or a tree or whatever, that is simple. There is no problem which language you use. could use any language. The moment you get into mathematics, particularly Western mathematics, because Western mathematics is diverse from the empirical, it is metaphysics. And that starts at the 6th standard. I don't know what you mean by early learners. For me, that's about as early as I can get.
Okay. I was thinking of primary, pre-primary, even from school, just the concepts I'm talking about, the giving and the taking.
I haven't gone to that level to talk about with kids. But say numbers, if you're talking about, or but let me talk of geometry. I think that's where metaphysics really gets in. And the point I'm making is that if metaphysics gets in, so if a point is something metaphysical, then how do you explain it? Because you don't have a straightforward, what should I say, translation. You see, you can't go from one language to another because the corresponding concepts are not present in the other language. And I think I have a video on this, on the colonialism. And I talked about, because people think you just translate it into Hindi and, done. So the 6th standard text uses a word called ubhaynisht to define an angle. Now this word ubhaynisht is, we are talking about poor children who are doing it in Hindi because they can't afford to do it in Hindi, in English. So it's not there in a Hindi dictionary. So how is the child going to understand what the word means? It's not there in the dictionary, and you can go to, if it's not there even in the Sanskrit dictionary. There are 2 separate words, ubhay and nisht, which are there in the Sanskrit dictionary, from which you are supposed to infer the meaning of ubhay nisht. What is it all about? It's about a common point. An angle is something but 2 rays with a common point. But there, because there is no corresponding vocabulary, because the notion of angle in Ganit is different. It's a curved line. And you can see that curved line, so the word for it is chap. And you don't have the corresponding metaphysics of 2 straight lines meeting at a common point. So you have a cone and kona and so on and so forth. So that is how it has been done. And it becomes highly problematic. So the problem is not just of language. You can't translate those concepts so easily because they are not present in the other language. And I have this problem very much if I'm talking about some of my ideas in Hindi. So unless I use Urdu, so in Persian, you get counterparts to so many Western philosophical concepts, because Greek and Persian, there are many philosophical points in common. So the Persian vocabulary is all right. You can say what is ontology, you can say what is epistemology. It's not so easy to use those words in Sanskrit or Hindi because they're not there. So that's one thing, but people have just been thinking that, you just try and translate these concepts into another language. So long as it has the feel of the other language, it should be all right. I think that's very bad. And it becomes terribly bad if you're looking at mathematics at a higher level. If I look at a 10th standard mathematics text, 12th standard, 10th standard, say calculus text, 11th and 12th standard, I can't understand it. Hindi was my mother tongue. At least it was my first language. It was not my mother's mother tongue, but it was my first language. I can't understand it unless I translate it back into English. And that's the problem that occurs. So this is something terribly bad. And so this translation that we have been doing for the last 75 years is completely bad. What we need to do is, what is the use of that Western metaphysics to address the whole issue? And we are completely unable to address even a very tiny issue like what is the evidence for Euclid. So this is something I don't know when it will happen, whether it will happen, how people will understand, and whether, I'm not saying it will not happen, I'm not giving up hope on that. It just happens so very slowly that in terms of my lifetime, I don't know whether it is going to happen in my lifetime. That's the issue. So it will happen eventually, but it takes a lot of time for people to understand these issues.
Now it occurred to me as you were just talking, I have read a column by you in the Hindu on the fad around Vedic mathematics.
Yeah.
Yes.
I just got a recent this thing on it, video on it. I just tweeted the video today or yesterday or something like that.
Okay.
So yes, very much so. Yeah, please continue with your question.
We can link. We can post a link to that video of yours. A lot of parents are misled into this, so if you can just debunk the myth.
Yeah, sure. So as I said, it is stated very clearly, I am against this idea of Vedic mathematics. I have written on it in Hindu, in Jansatta, and so on. First of all, because the label Vedic is misleading. It is not there in the Ved. What is there in the Ved is a different mathematics altogether. There's a different book on it, and the book Vedic mathematics accepts it. It's not there in the Ved. Then people will say, oh, it is ancient knowledge. Now, how do you know it is ancient knowledge? Because in fact, you find a mention of the Katapayadi system. The Katapayadi system is not so ancient. Certainly it doesn't go back to the time of the Ved, because at that time there are all sorts of other systems in use. So it's a more recent system. And how recent this is, we don't know. Okay, but in any case, it's not Vedic. And then the third question is, where is it found? It's not mentioned anywhere in the entire Indian literature, 3,000 years of literature from the time of the Vedang Jyotish to Nilkant. So minus 1500 CE to plus 1500 CE, that's 3,000 years. Nobody talks about it. So where does it come from? All right, now wherever it has come from, point is, what is its advantage? So the only advantage is that it enables you to do some mental arithmetic. Now, what is the advantage of mental arithmetic today when you have so many computers and so on and so forth? You know, they had an advantage once upon a time. But if I want to work with big numbers, I mean, if Shakuntala Devi, you know, that's all right. She's making a show and she's doing it. I was impressed when I saw her. But that is not a requirement for most people. To be able to multiply and to try and race with computers. You can't ultimately race with computers as the numbers get bigger. So the point is, that is not an issue. It's not worth anything. And what are we replacing? We are replacing our own mathematics. That is Indian mathematics that we are replacing, you know, because this mathematics that we do, simple arithmetic and so on, this is mathematics which went from India to Europe and came back through colonial education. It's our own mathematics. So why are we wanting to displace that? Right. For no particular reason. So this video takes up this question because actually it's a talk at Army War College, and their king also took up this issue of Vedic mathematics and so on. And so I started by clarifying, and all the literature is there. If you, it's there on my YouTube channel.
Yes, while it does seem a long road ahead in appropriation and improving the academic system, let us hope there be a revolution and which will turn things around. And Professor Raju is very much around to see things change for the better. Thank you so much for your time. And we were eagerly waiting for this interview. Now, keeping in line with O's spirit, we have a small gift for you, Professor Raju, from a young and talented metal artist, Suraj, who runs a metal art studio by the name Craft Tune Light. We request our viewers to please have a look at Suraj's work. We have all the details here in the description for you. Please stop gifting plastic. We have great artists, and sustainability should be our lifestyle, not just a mantra. But because we are struck by the pandemic, and also this chat is on Zoom, our only option is to courier this gift to you, Professor Raju. Thank you once again.
Sure.
Thank you so much.